We hold these truths, a reverent review of the U.S. Constitution by Lawrence Patton, McDonald. Chapter 1, A Simpler World. In this fourth quarter of the 20th century, famous scholars and political scientists throughout the Western world are proclaiming that democracy is dying. Many cite the decline of the United States as a major cause, but in contemplating remedies, they warn that we can't go back to a simpler world. There are grave undertones and connotations in that warning, especially for Americans. Ever since Franklin D. Roosevelt in the mid-1930s equated the governmental principles in the Constitution with a horse and buggy society, we began to confuse principles and material goods in our thinking. The buggy may have been outmoded, but political principles are eternal. Neither time nor new technology alters them. The complexity of social organization does change. Our technologically sophisticated industrial society is more complex than the agrarian society of America in the 18th century. In this regard, that was a simpler world. But the complexities of politics here meaning the science of governing, do not change much. The basic political problems confronting the framers of our Constitution were as complex as our political problems today, perhaps more so because they were striking off into the dangerous unknown, whereas all we need to do is return to the fine highway we were once on. Pleading for reestablishment of constitutional government as ordained by the Constitution of 1789 is not ignorant advocation of a return to a simpler world. Rather, it is a suggestion that the nation climb up and stand on the high ground it once proudly held. The high ground is still there. The governmental system ordained in our Constitution is as appropriate for our nation today as it was for the America of 1789. It is even more desperately needed now than then. I have heard Americans say they cannot imagine living under the kind of federal government the Constitution established in 1789. It was limited to defending us against foreign aggressions and against a few specified kinds of aggressions at home, and it could collect enough sales tax on things we bought to pay the tiny cost of its own operations in protecting us. Otherwise, it was so restricted that it could do nothing for us except keep its tax collectors' hands out of our pockets, stay out of our affairs, and leave us alone to sink or swim, survive or perish on our own. If we had any problems we wanted government to help solve, we could only appeal to our local or state governments because there were no grants available to us from Washington. It was different, not only from what we have now, but from any other governmental system that ever was. But we can look into the pages of history and see how well it worked. It left Americans so much freedom to manage their own lives that they quickly developed their portion of the backward, underdeveloped Western Hemisphere. They astonished the world with their unparalleled accomplishments. When our federal government was being formed and began operating, an industrial revolution caused sudden upheavals in the economic and social order both in Europe and America. Europeans accepted the socialist ideal that only an all-powerful government, regulating, managing, and subsidizing private affairs could save the people from whatever bad conditions the new industrialism would produce. As a consequence of this dependence on government, Europe sank into poverty and tyranny. Americans adhered rather closely to the free market ideal that people should remain free to find their own solutions for economic problems, whether caused by industry or by nature. The force of government would be used, if deemed necessary, only at the local level, under local control, to meet local needs. And as a result, America became a new promised land. We later Americans have all but forfeited the great charter of liberty that made possible the miracle of America. It still exists for us to examine. If we still like it, we can reestablish it. Doing that will require as much persistence and dedication and plain hard work on our part as was required of the 18th century gentleman who created it. It will require as much labor to regain it as it did to create it, but thankfully not more. To understand the federal government that was conceived for this nation, we need to know something about why it was created and under what conditions. The best place to begin, therefore, is at the beginning, the groping beginning toward union or confederation by the British colonials